safe trip back?
Yes, yes. Worked out pretty well.
Ryan with the Campaign for College Opportunity.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Bernadette
thrilled to
Halbert
be
from Sac State, and I'll be moderating the meeting.
Now, I heard that we only have about 2 minutes for comments, and that the vast majority of this is going to be question max. Well, then I will be very, very brief.
1 to 2 minutes.
Yeah, I actually...
1 to 2 minutes, and after that, the students will get up. They've got prepared questions that they will address either to you individually or to anyone on the panel.
Wonderful.
And we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. So when you get a question, we're going to ask that you respond as succinctly as possible. But we're obviously all passionate about this topic, so...
Great.
Yeah, wonderful.
I actually, on Saturday, just spoke to the Junior Statesmen of America who were in Sacramento for their annual legislative.
Oh, wonderful.
Great group of individuals. There were about 1,000 students actually, so quite phenomenal turnout.
I'll wait on mine. Okay, if you can get her, I'll get mine too.
Eric, is Eric headed over? Oh, okay. Oh.
Hi. No, you didn't. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. I know you're really busy. We're delighted to have you. I do too.
I do too. Anytime, right? I agree.
I'm so excited.
My name's Jessie. I'm with the Campaign for College Opportunity.
Very nice to meet you. My students are right there in the front row from my district, so I'm so excited. Either, I'm sorry, I'm just turning this off.
Hi. Good to see you too. Yes.
Hopefully he's on his way.
Something you said about the fact that the women are here?
I know. I was saying that on Saturday, or actually it was Sunday, I had the opportunity to speak to about 1,000 students at the Junior Statesmen of America conference.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Oh, it was wonderful. I mean, they were so energetic and enthused, and they had each actually...
Where was this?
This was at the convention center. And so then they did some mock hearings and
my timing, and I'm ready to go.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was incredible. Just
Let me ask you a question. What was the gender mix?
It was, I would say, about 60% female. Right. Well, and that's actually why they asked me, because they wanted to be able to have a young...
Good morning.
They could take leadership.
Welcome to LegiSchool and our first town hall meeting of 2011. I'm delighted you're here. My name is Bernadette Halbrook. I'm from California State University, Sacramento, and I'm going to be your moderator for what I know is going to be a very exciting meeting this morning. We're here talking about something that is vitally important to all of us in the state of California, but particularly to you as you begin to think about your plans beyond high school, and that is, what is the future of public higher education in the state of California going to be like? LegiSchool is a collaboration between California State University, Sacramento, and the California State Legislature, and it is moderated and administrated by the Center for California Studies at Sacramento State. I want to begin by welcoming you, our high school studio audience, and I want to acknowledge the schools that we have represented with us this morning. John F. Kennedy High School from Fremont, Mount Eden High School, Hayward, Rio Americana High School, Sacramento, Academy of Our Lady of Peace, San Diego, and Lodi High School in Lodi. Thank you for being here, and we're delighted that you made the trip. We also have with us this morning a distinguished group of panelists who are here to respond to your questions and your issues. And so I'm going to give each of them a brief minute to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about why this issue is important to them. Senator Corbett.
Good morning and welcome to all of the future leaders of California. We're so very happy to have you here. And I want to give a special shout out to the students from my district, from JFK High School. Thank you for being here. I just wanted to let you know that probably the most important thing I'm going to be doing today is spending time with you as future leaders. It's so much more important these days with the economy the way it is to establish this bridge between legislators and student leaders such as yourselves. I want to commend also my colleague, Senator Lowenthal, who will be here shortly. He is the chair of the State Senate Education Committee, and he's very, very committed to the future of education in the state of California. Our financial crisis, the financial crisis that we are facing is a difficult one, and it sort of sometimes crowds out some of the other things we are looking at as legislators. It's so important that you're here today, and I often tell students when I meet with them, you're here today to sit around a table with us. We have a large table here in the Capitol and only so many chairs, and if you're not here sitting in one of those chairs, your ideas, your concerns are not heard as loudly as others. So I'm very, very happy that you're here today. We are facing a very painful deficit this year. We will have some very difficult choices to make, and that is, again, why it's so important that you're sitting around the chairs, voicing your concerns, so they can be heard as part of this discussion. Our governor has laid out a plan that hopefully can get us through these economic times, but we need to hear from you as part of that discussion. I currently am the Senate Majority Leader, very concerned about making sure that we all work together, hear the voices of people throughout California, and do what we can for the future of our state. I know you've all heard you are the leaders of the future, but you truly are the leaders of the future. So I hope that we can set a great example for you as legislators so you can go on and use that example to lead in your future as well. I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Ms. Ryan?
Good morning. My name is Jessie Ryan. I'm the Associate Director with the Campaign for College Opportunity, and I will try to be brief, but I share Senator Corbett's enthusiasm about you each being here to be part of civic engagement and participatory democracy. I have to tell you, there is nothing that gives me more energy for the work that I do. I was the first in my family to go to college and am a proud product of the community college system and the CSU, and was fortunate to have a mother who told me that if I wanted to make my way in the world, I first had to get a college education, but then I had to give back. And I know that each of you understand that you will be the future of California, and it's incredibly heartening to me to see your young faces and to know how engaged you are in the discussion about how we invest and really what our public higher education system will look like moving forward. The Campaign for College Opportunity is a statewide nonprofit. We are a bipartisan coalition of more than 15,000 business, labor, civic, and education leaders who are dedicated to ensuring that we meet the future workforce needs of the state of California. We, as you know, are going to face a shortage of 1 million bachelor's degrees as projected by the Public Policy Institute of California by 2025. So we need each of you to go on, pursue your higher education, and come back into this building to make the laws that will really help to see our public higher education system regain its stature as a leader in the nation and the world. I look forward to answering your questions today, and once again, thank you so much for being here.
Ms. Humphrey?
Good morning. I'm Karen Humphrey, and I'm the Executive Director of the California Post-Secondary Education Commission, which is a very small state agency that probably none of you have heard of, but we have some wonderful data and information about higher education, And our role is to inform and help the state of California, the governor, the legislature, nonprofits that we work with like Campaign for College Opportunity, try to make sure that California has the higher education system that's absolutely necessary for California. So I'm delighted to see you here. When they called me and said, do you want to come speak at a high school LegiSchool effort, I jumped at the chance because Senator Corbett and Jesse are right. When we get to talk to you, we know we're talking to people who are going to make a difference in the world. And I would say the most important immediate step that you can do is the day you turn 18 is go down to your local elections office, register to vote, and never miss an election, because no matter how it turns out, that's the most important way American citizens have to register how they feel about issues. I just want to tell you, I have a very eclectic career. I once worked in television news. I was once a local government official, council, and mayor in Fresno. And I've been doing this policy work with the Department of Education, which is K-12, and CPEC for about 14 years now. Just a couple of quick perspectives to think about when you're asking your questions, and I look forward to hearing them too. One, we have to stop looking at education as a bunch of unrelated silos, preschool, K-12, community college, CSU, UC, the private schools. We have to start thinking about the P20 continuum, and we have to understand the connection from that into the workforce. The second point that I think is important is that we have to stop saying college or career. We have to start saying college and career. In this era, every single person who wants to have a good quality of life and be self-sufficient ultimately needs some kind of education beyond high school. So that's a perspective we're very strongly oriented to at CPEC. And the third thing is that as we look at this terrifically difficult budget issue and understand already the impact on higher ed, we have to start thinking about setting some goals for outcomes in our public higher education systems. We have some wonderful goals for access and some wonderful goals for affordability, but we don't yet say what we want those systems to produce so that we know that California's needs are being met. So we look forward to working with the legislature and the governor's office and others, because as those goals become clear, I think then some of the budget issues will become easier to think about in the future. But in the meantime, we look very forward to hearing what you have to say, and it's time for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much. So as you can see, we've got a panel of experts ready to go. Are you ready to go? Okay. Here's how we're going to work. We've got students lining up at the microphone already. When it's your turn to pose a question, please very clearly state your name, let us know what school you're from, and ask your question. You're free to ask your question to one of the panelists in particular or to anyone on the panel who wishes to respond. Once you've stated your question, you can go ahead and be seated. Okay? Let's get going.
Hello, my name is Olivia Petty, and I'm a senior at the Academy of Our Lady of Peace in San Diego. And my question for the whole panel is, do you think that California will become less competitive as a state with fewer trained or educated individuals due to the rising costs of higher education?
One of the things that we do hear from the experts is that we really do need to make sure that we have a trained workforce for the future. As you know, our wonderful economy in California is driven by some very interesting industries, high-tech and biotech and those sorts of things. So obviously a trained workforce is extremely important to us. And the legislature is keenly aware of that. We have been focused on programs that allow people to have access. We're very concerned about the cost of education, and we know that impacts students. But we also try to provide programs to allow students to have access, even though there may be fees that are a little on the high side. So we know that it can create a problem with competitiveness, so that's why we're very committed to do something about it and not let that happen in California. And that was a great question.
Thank you.
I would agree with that. You're absolutely right. If we don't address what is happening, and we have an opportunity to do that, but if we don't, we do face the possibility of California being not only significantly less competitive, but of putting the state on an economic slide that will be very difficult to arrest. So that's one of the reasons to begin to make sure that we have the vision for the next 5 to 10 years that will turn that around and start to produce more and more trained, highly educated workers who can work in any of the industries that power California's economy. One of the things that I think is important is that higher costs have been a factor. The universities have been forced to raise fees over time. In many ways, they're still among the lowest for public universities in the country, but California's cost of living is a little higher. We have to start figuring, and we've maintained student financial aid, which has certainly been a help, but it has not ameliorated all the issues. But there are a lot of people who never start to college because they don't know what's available, or they don't have the support, and they don't have the support to be successful when they get there in higher ed. So I think that we have to look at it as a connected problem, and that each of these pieces is significant, but the ultimate outcome has to be a state that can really be the California we want it to be.
Senator Ellen Lowenthal has just joined us. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Ceccarelli, and I'm from San Diego, the Academy of Our Lady of Peace. And my question is, if higher education programs get cut, what will happen to the professors who lose their jobs?
Who wants to take that one as a professor?
Well, we're trying to, again, do what we can to make sure that we don't have those sorts of cuts. You know, obviously we have many, many talented and dedicated professors throughout all of our higher education systems, and we also hear from them as well. They come to visit us in Sacramento. So, again, what the governor is actually trying to do with our budget this year is to deal with the situation of the deficit that rolls over year after year after year. And he is going to be asking us to make some tough choices, and he is asking to put some measures on the ballot so that the people can vote on them to help us support the education system. But these tough choices that we will be asked to make hopefully will remedy this economic situation so we won't have to continue facing a choice of cuts year after year. So what will happen to these professors? Let's try to do what we can so that we don't lose them. That's how I look at it. I prefer to look at the positive outcome. And thank you for that question.
I believe that right now the governor is proposing a $500 million cut to higher education, to UC, $500 million, I think, to CSU, and $400 million to the community colleges. Some of that will be offset by the increases that they've already proposed that will be going into effect. So there's about, let's say, the 4-year schools, about $350 million in cuts. They're going to try to keep that out of the classroom. It's the last time they're going to have larger classes, sizes. Administration is going to take big hits. They're going to have to go out and find private donors to begin to fund the universities more in terms of their fundraising effort. But if we, as Senator Corbett said, that's to get through now. So everybody's right at the heart, at the bone. If we fail in June to have people maintain the existing tax structure as it is now, and we have to face an additional $12 to $14 billion in cuts, the higher education will take a serious part of that. We don't know how much yet, but a serious part of that. And it will destroy what the vision of what we call California. Now, I'm not trying to scare you or saying, but that much cuts will have a devastating effect.
I would add to the comments that have been made that the issue at the moment is really less experienced tenured professors being laid off or let go, although that has happened to some degree. It's a lot. For years, the universities have been trying to serve students they're already serving more students than they get paid for. So they've been trying to do it with adjunct professors, with specialized kinds of classes. Those are the things that are going already, while the core curriculum and the tenured faculty remain. But here's what's going to happen, not just in higher education, but in K-12. The more difficult it looks to figure that you can be successful as a teacher, you're going to get beat up as a teacher, particularly if you're in K-12 for your success, and you may not have a job. We have already, the number of people entering teaching training in college has dropped almost by half in the last 4 or 5 years. We will not, as we try to rebuild both our higher education and our K-12 systems, we will not have the talented, skilled teachers that we need, and it'll be a much more difficult thing. So this has been a long-term deterioration. We can rebuild it. I think what was just said about the need to at least continue the revenue streams we have right now is a critical first step in keeping from going in a worse place.
And I would just add, I mean, obviously this budget is a difficult budget, and we're going to be sharing some sacrifice across the board. But when it comes to faculty, I would share Karen's concern, because the message that we're sending, if we don't figure out a way to preserve our best teachers, is that you'll have to go elsewhere. And the worst thing that we could possibly do is see our teachers leave to other states, have the economy rebound, and try to figure out how we're going to be able to offer the excellent courses that have made our university so great in the past.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Lexi Goldwyn. I'm from the Rio Americano Civitas program, and my question is for Jesse Ryan. The UCs are growing more and more selective. They're accepting fewer students than ever, often not Californians. What do you suggest the UCs do to give more local students a chance?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think you might be familiar with a bill that the campaign worked on last year. We worked on a couple of different bills because one of the things that the campaign has been significantly concerned with is students understanding what it would be necessary to do and take to get into a CSU and a UC with guaranteed admission. Last year, in an effort to simplify the transfer pathway for our community college students to both the CSU and UC system, we brought forth, in partnership with the community college system and the CSU and the student senates from both of those segments, two bills, one SB 1440 and another AB 2302, that would allow community college students, which are really, community colleges, as you know, are the gateway to opportunity for our vast majority of students in California. In fact, they're serving about 2.5 million students currently. But this bill would make sure that students who entered this transfer degree pathway in the community college would be guaranteed admission to the CSU with junior status upon completion of this pathway. We have a companion bill to the UC to get to the portion of the UC question, which we're working on with the Office of the President to ensure that a similar pathway exists from the community college system to the UC system. It is our elite institution. However, we must make sure that there are clear pathways that will guarantee admission for our students from the community colleges as they move through to the UCs.
Let me say also, CPEC, one of CPEC's roles is to conduct studies every 3 or 4 years on the number of students who will be eligible for UC and CSU under the master plan. 12.5%, the top 12.5% of students are supposed to have access to the UC, the top 33% to CSU, and everybody has access to the community colleges. The impact on enrollments at both the CSU and UC are totally budget related right now. There are some eligibility issues, not just at UC and CSU, around the edges of students, but the bottom line is there's not enough room and not enough money for everybody who potentially could qualify for UC and CSU to get there at the moment. Students are now being turned away in both systems. They are making some space, although we are told it's not at the expense of California students, for out-of-state students who pay far more money and contribute financially to that. I think if we don't maintain a state commitment to the segments, they're going to be pushed more and more to do that. But the bottom line is we need to figure out how much capacity we need in our system. CPEC just did a study in 2019, approximately 400,000 more students will show up at the door on the first day of fall semester than currently show up right now throughout the three systems. We don't have room for those 400,000. So this is some of the long-term planning and some of the rebuilding that we need to do in terms of the master plan guaranteeing access. There are a whole lot of things to be done. Most of them cost some money, but I think they're really important investments in the state's future. And again, we're all trying to get through this current budget crisis in a way that does not make things significantly worse and then start to figure out long range how we can build.
And I actually just wanted to add one thing. While it is extremely difficult to get into some of the more desirable UCs, such as UC Berkeley and UCLA, there is untapped capacity currently in the UC system. So, I think it's very important to note there is a new UC campus in UC Merced in the Central Valley with a vast amount of untapped capacity. And as students are turned away from the campus of choice, they are often redirected to campuses like UC Merced, UC Riverside, and UC Santa Cruz as alternative options.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Sam Calvert, and I'm from the Civitas program at Rio Americano. And I was wondering why in college the course requirements or the requirements to get into the colleges are so varied between separate colleges, and why the requirements are also so rounded and in such a variety of subjects, when it seems like we should be geared more towards a specific career path because that's what we're studying for in college.
Wow.
Good question.
Two questions, actually.
That's a really good CPEC question
Yeah.
because that's the kind of thing we wrestle with in higher ed. Well, the first thing is that to some extent the course requirements and the courses are very different because of the whole structure of higher education, which basically allows the campuses and the individual professors the ability to set their own standards and their own courses. There is some commonality. We've long appreciated the fact that we need to both have more connection between what you finished with in high school and what you're going to need the first day you walk into college, and that work is happening. The passage of the two bills that Ms. Ryan just talked about are incredibly important because so many students do come through the transfer route and do very well when they hit the UC and CSU, and private colleges. Some of them go on to independent, nonprofit private colleges as well. That's the subject of a lot of discussion, and the connection of programs to workforce needs is another big issue we've looked at closely at CPEC. Colleges and universities need to, both at the state and the local levels, they need to be in conversation and do their program planning and their course planning based on some of the needs that they see in the community. I don't believe that college is only to train people to go to work. I think that a great deal of what we call the liberal arts are incredibly important, including the work skills like being able to think critically and work in teams and apply knowledge. All of those things are important in the workforce as well. But you can't be disconnected either from the needs of work. So those conversations are growing. We've been trying at CPEC to get them to happen a little bit more at the state level, so that there would be some understanding of the connection between everywhere from preschool all the way through to the workforce. And I'm hoping that those will accelerate. And I think that the work that goes on around implementing 1440 with the transfer curriculum will do a lot to influence other programs in the universities to make sure that we begin to have a little more consistency. But you're right, it is a big problem, and part of the problem is there's not enough counselors in either high school or college to help guide you through that maze.
Thank you.
I want to take a moment before we go on to welcome Eric Guerra from Assembly Member for Otani's office. Good morning, Eric. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Hello, my name is Kenji Anzai. I am also from the Civitas program at Rio Americano, and I was wondering what solution that you all think is best to solve the problem with the budget to ensure that ensure the master plan and that California can have a free higher education, and why you think that would be the best solution to solve the budget problem.
Okay, for free.
Well, I'll jump in on that. I'm not quite sure I understood the second part of the question, but as I understand, you're saying, what do we see as the solution to the budget problem?
Yes.
And the impacts on higher education. As I mentioned before, one of the things that I think that we can do together is to educate and to talk about it. I think what will be before the voters of California, hopefully, is the greatest choice that they have ever made. They will truly make the choice in terms of what type of California they want. To do that, people need to be educated and talked about. And so us having this conversation should not just be between us. You should then go home and to talk to your friends and your parents and others about what is the future, and how do we solve this budget problem? From my perspective, the way we solve the budget problem is to follow the general guideline that the governor has asked us to do, and that is to create a sustainable budget that does not, based upon kicking the can down the road, deferring payments, selling buildings, all these one-time things, but to say, let's have a budget that's transparent, where our expenditures meet our revenues. That's what we're going to do. And then we can figure out from there this long-range planning of where we're going to go. But unless we have a sustainable budget and a stability for at least 5 years, we're not going to be able to get to what type of higher educational system we truly want and what are those skills. And so in doing that, the governor is saying we have a $25 billion structural deficit. You solve that problem, legislature, with me and the people of California, and we will, by not doing these things just to protect everybody, it wasn't bad things because we were trying to keep everything together, but if you solve this problem by having a sustainable budget this time, we will be able to really look at what kind of California we want to do in the future. But we can't do it unless we have a sustainable budget now. That is the core. And so he's saying if you need to fix that $25 billion, let's do $12.5 billion in cuts, and let's also do $12.5 billion in just maintaining the existing taxes that are going to go away this year. Not raising taxes, just maintaining them for 5 years. That is the solution.
I would agree with my colleague, Senator Lowenthal, and I think maybe that might be one of the his message is one of the most important things you might be able to take away with you as you go home after today's conference. We're obviously hearing from you that you're very concerned about the future of higher education, the costs of higher education, the quality of higher education, access to higher education. All of the questions that have been asked so far have focused on those issues. And Senator Lowenthal and I, along with many of our colleagues, understand that these budget choices facing us do impact those colleges. And we do have to figure out how to deal with this $25 billion. That's an awfully big number, isn't it? $25 billion of a deficit that we have to deal with. In California, we are required to pass a balanced budget. I know you hear all sorts of things when you watch TV or listen to the radio, but we are required to have a balanced budget, so we must face that $25 billion. And the governor's plan seeks to look at that in sort of a 50-50 proposition, 50% of cuts and 50% asking voters to move forward and keep taxes that are already on the books. And one of the reasons we are so focused on that is because we really do care about education. As Senator Lowenthal said earlier, if we had to face the $25 billion deficit entirely by cuts, unfortunately, education would be in the middle of that. So I know personally, I don't want to see that happen. So I am going to be somebody who's advocating to help people understand that this is a plan that will help us not only address the budget this year, but will also allow us to make some structural change so that we don't continue to borrow or do other things that affect moving that deficit into future years. And part of it is because of the economy. Because our economy is where it is today, other traditional sources of revenue are not coming in as they have in the past. And so that is part of the reason we have this deficit. But thank you for asking us that question, and please bring that message home with you.
Can I just jump in, because you said something in the second part of your question regarding a free public higher education. When the master plan was adopted 50 years ago, I think that was the vision, and actually that vision was primarily in the community colleges. This is a much, much different world than it was 50 years ago. The size of the state, the needs of the state, the declining percentage of state budget funding that's been applied to both higher education and until Prop 98 was happening in K-12. This is not a reality that we're going to go back to, except that we hope to sustain financial aid that will essentially make tuition free for students in lower income levels. It is probably appropriate for students to pay some share of the cost of going to college, particularly if we can make that affordable for them, and that's the big effort at the moment. California's we don't want to call it fees. We haven't called it tuition, but now we're getting honest enough to say it really is the equivalent of tuition, so let's call it tuition. CPAC has long said if there are going to be any increases in those fees, they should be moderate, gradual, and predictable, so that you know when you start college what you're going to likely end up with. That has not been the case for the last several years. And we don't have any agreement in the state about what's the appropriate level of what students and their families should contribute to their education, because there's both private and public benefit here. So again, and I think we can't reinforce the message too strongly, this year is a critical year to figure out whether we can move ourselves in a direction of real solutions and work ourselves out of a very bad budget thing. But we need to also have those larger conversations about how much education do we want, what's the state's responsibility to support it. There is simply no such thing as a free lunch anymore. But you certainly should be assured the right to get a higher education of quality, and that's the dream of the master plan, and we need to make sure somehow we make that reality.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, hello, my name is Benjamin from the Civitas program at Rio Americano, and my question is, what do you picture California's higher education system looking like within the next 5 years in terms of cuts and possibly improvements?
Good question.
Well, if I had a crystal ball, and I spent a lot of time in my district and moving around the state, and I do know that a quality higher education is what is on most people's minds. If you talk to people about, what are you concerned about, the state's future, education always is part of that conversation. So my crystal ball, if I focus my crystal ball, I think my crystal ball tells me that not only students, but their parents will be continuing to advocate here in Sacramento, in their communities, to put pressures on the decision makers to have a much better, or do what we can to have as best of a education system as we can in the state of California. So I wouldn't want to predict what's going to happen if we have the ability to vote on these measures we're talking about, but I do think that there is strong support for people as long as they know that these measures are going to help the future of education in the state of California, that we hopefully will have good support for those. So my crystal ball tells me that there is a bright future. My crystal ball tells me we are going to get through this crisis in the short term because people are so focused on the future of their children, and that is, a priority in the state of California. And I do believe those involved in industry and business look at this as a very important part of their future as well, and that they will also be weighing in and asking people to make the right decisions with regard to maintaining the quality of education in California. And again, we do know, if we talk to the economists and other experts, we are told that it is very important for the state of California to have an excellent higher education system so that we do have a trained workforce and so that we can continue to have the spirit of entrepreneurship in California and be able to do all those important things that go on in our universities. Develop, new ways to protect people's health and new ways of doing business and all of those things that make California such a dynamic economy. So my crystal ball tells me the future is bright, but in the short term, we will have to make some difficult decisions.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that. I also think that, besides being, before I was a legislator, I was a faculty member at Cal State Long Beach for almost my entire adult life, and as a psychologist. And so for me, I perceive the kinds of situations, the crises, as times when great opportunities can occur. Not only do we have potential for terrible kinds of consequences, which we all have to be aware of, but we also have to be aware of this is a time of great opportunities to use our resources more wisely. And I think what you're going to see in the future at higher education is, because we're going to get through this. We are going to get through this. We are California, and we are going to move forward. And you're going to see greater emphasis on performance. Students are going to, higher numbers are going to get through high school and college. than we have now, and better linkages to jobs. And I also think that what we're going to see even more so than that is greater. We're going to think of our system not necessarily as higher education and K through 12 and preschool as one system. They're all different. They all have their integrity, and we're going to share resources much better. And we're going to be a state that's going to be proud of its successes. That's really what we're going to be, because we can be successful in California. We have both the skills, the skill set. We have led the world in lots of other things. We're going to lead the world in education again, as we did earlier. And that's because of you and the people around. And as long as we use these resources wisely and interconnect them and see it's all related and be able to be nimble, it's going to happen. It's already happening. We don't create it in the legislature. We're just going to support it, and it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think Senator Lowenthal just spoke to the most critical part about it, and to your second part of the question. I think we know what may happen with the cuts, but the second part of your question was improvements. What does our system look like with improvements? And the circumstance that we're in right now has led to conversations that we would not have seen go as in depth that we have in previous years. Conversations that are very difficult amongst different segments of higher education, of how we work together, how we collaborate together. But not even in just higher education, but also in the labor sector. If we look at the rounding of, just grossly rounding numbers here, the number of students that go to the University of California is in the 200,000. If you look at the number of students that go to the California State University system, let's say it's about 500,000. But the number of students that go to the community colleges is in the million. It's a very different decimal point at that point. And the reason is because the significantly large population of our working body, our middle-class population, need this type of 2-year type of training, workforce training. And there's a lot of work that's happening right now around trying to also look at those who do not pursue a 4-year degree, and how do we get people into the middle class, and that's with a 2-year type of certification. The recession that we're in is quite different than the recessions that we have felt in the U.S. in the history of U.S., where we've lost jobs because industries had to lay people off because of the economy, but then all of a sudden we've been able to hire them back because the industry, those same companies, were able to generate the amount of profit to hire people back. In this recession, we've lost jobs, but all of a sudden, those industries can't even hire them back because those industries are completely gone. We've lost a certain sector of jobs in our country, so that those folks who were trained for that type of job can no longer compete in the marketplace. So our community colleges, this area of education that serves so many people, needs to look at better ways of coordinating with all our labor partners and workforce investment boards, private post-secondary schools as well, to look at using our funds more appropriately. Our federal funds that come down for adult training, for adult worker education, come down in multiple different pots. Some of them our labor agency gets it, some of them our community colleges get them, our adult education program in the Department of Ed gets them. It's separated in 50 different pots because our system of government has been broken up into so many little kingdoms and silos. I think what's going to happen in the future is that the pressure of performance, as the senator pointed out, is going to focus on how do we use our money more effectively to meet the demand of the majority of our Californians. And that's going to be in that workforce development area.
So critically important, regardless of whether we're talking about 2-year college or 4-year university, is training a 21st century workforce. Right. Yeah. What that's going to be like and what that's going to mean for the future of a robust economy in California. Yes, sir. Next question.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Ryan Burns, and I go to Rio Americano in the Civitas Academy as well. My question is, with the rise of students attending private universities, California is losing income that could be used to improve our education system. How can California convince students to attend UCs and CSUs when private institutions are able to bring their costs lower than public colleges?
Are you referring to the Stanford, USC, USF, things of that? There's two kinds of private universities and colleges. One is what's known as the independent sector, which are nonprofit, WASC accredited, so they're accredited to award degrees, and they're primarily academic, and some of them are career-oriented, but they operate. There's about 76 to 80 of those universities around the state of California, large and small, and I'm a graduate of USC, so that's one of that group. And to some extent right now, with increasing tuition and the ability of the private schools that have good endowments to be able to write down through financial aid, at the moment, they're somewhat competitive. We actually, even if you doubled the size of the CSU and the UC and the community colleges, you still don't really probably have enough space to address the growing need for college degrees at all levels in California. So the private schools are a very important part of that. The other sector is the private for-profit sector, which is primarily focused on occupational training of some sort. And their public support actually comes from financial aid. They have access to public dollars for financial aid. We need to ask of all the schools, particularly those with occupational efforts, what are people getting for that, and are they getting it at the best price, and are they able when they graduate to get the jobs that they trained for? That's a big question, I think, for all of us. So I would not say that the private schools don't have a role in California, and in many ways we don't have students are going to them because there's not capacity. They can't enroll at community colleges. They can't get the classes they want, so they're going to private schools. There's also some educational model differences. A lot of the private schools use more online education. Public education is beginning to look real hard at where online education fits in. They'll do things, they'll structure courses and programs in shorter time frames. We have an issue to be continually concerned about quality there, but I believe that both the for-profit and the nonprofit independent colleges have a role in helping California meet its higher education needs. And policy concerns for the legislature and for the rest of us need to be looking at all of them. But we also need to make sure that the state's premier public higher education systems, which are the finest in the world, also continue to play their very important role.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi, my name is Wendy White, and I'm also from Rio Americano Civitas Academy. This question is directed to the whole panel. So, students are given financial aid if their parents or guardian make under a certain amount. But what about parents who are self-employed? Because those parents also have to worry about making sure they can run their business by paying for their needs, such as computers, a workspace, etc. What about these parents? Because I know when you're applying for financial aid with my sister this year, there wasn't anywhere on there to place you were self-employed. So what do you propose for these middle-class families?
Actually, the place to probably get one of the best answers to this is from the California Student Aid Commission, which processes the Cal Grants effort. I believe that financial aid eligibility is based on income, and that a parent who's self-employed can provide the income information. So if it does fall below the level, then students are still eligible. I understand that somebody who's self-employed, in many cases, middle-class people in middle-class jobs cannot afford the amount of money that's expected for family contributions for people who are not low income. The real affordability crisis that is growing in California is for middle-income families, and we'll have a report on the March 1st CPEC agenda that will talk directly about the portion of family incomes that are beginning to be required to go to college. So clearly families are going to always be making some level of sacrifice to make sure that their students go to college, but there's been a hugely increasing level of sacrifice beyond the ability of parents to do it. So what you're asking about is a small piece of the affordability issue. It's an important piece, and perhaps at one point you can talk to somebody from Student Aid Commission who can also help people understand the best way that families could qualify for this. But and I'll make a real quick, very, very quick advertisement for CPEC. Our meetings are available online. They're video streamed online. I put some brochures up here about our college guide and about the mobile application. I know that all of you carry cell phones and have some kind of mobile applications. So you can get some information there, and you can also get to the Student Aid Commission. But your point is not just limited to self-employed people. Middle-income people are having a real problem getting their kids to college now.
And you do ask a very, very important question. There are a lot of people who find themselves in the situation that you have related to us. Just a few short years ago, we did have the opportunity to expand the Cal Grant program, and that was an answer to people who were struggling to find the resources to send their students to school, or students who are, also supporting themselves, find a pathway for them to enter school. So there's a whole measure of financial aid programs, and there probably should be a little more attention made to make sure that people in middle income brackets also have the ability to, pursue their American dream and attend college. So your point's very important. And again, going back to this discussion we have had about today's economy and what we're going to be asked to do in the next few months, part of our ideal is to be able to put these economic issues behind us so we can then again revisit Cal Grants. And I know there are many members who would like to see those programs expanded as soon as we have the funds available to do that. So keep asking that question. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Nate Bernardo, and I'm with John F. Kennedy High School with the Green Ventures Academy. My question is, with the new technologies being invented every day, how do you think the evolution of technology will affect the quality of education and cost to prospective students going into higher education?
Interesting question. What's the role of technology in the future of higher education?
Obviously, the role of technology is extremely important, and I know that you've probably seen that in your classrooms and in your other local higher educational institutions. For example, Ohlone College, which is your neighbor. Obviously, as Senator Lowenthal was talking about earlier, through higher technology, we sometimes have the opportunity to cut costs and find efficiencies. So we really should search for those efficiencies with the help of new technology. And sometimes it costs up front a lot of money to start those sorts of systems, but that really is where we should be going. That's just another area where we can save money and obviously allow for a better quality education with these new technologies in the classroom. And obviously, for those of you who are the future, who know much more about technology in the classroom than I do, because I was in the classroom a while back, you need to be able to have that equipment so that you can compete in our continuing evolution of our workforce. So it's someplace we should be focusing on, definitely.
I just wanted to add that in a time where we're having to cut so many programs and we have such limited resources, there has been a vast expansion of online learning opportunities. I think you know that students today do not learn the same way that students were 20 years ago. They are so savvy with social media and so capable in having rich online discussions with peers. And so we're having to learn from that and figure out how we can deliver a quality online environment that might enable students who have, the stress of outside work or might be traveling to campuses and have challenges in proximity to their local campuses to be able to take advantage of more online courses. Also, as capacity becomes such a huge issue and students are waiting semester after semester to be able to get the classes they need to successfully progress, they're now often able to register in online classes that help them complete those general education pathways and move on. So we're going to continue to have to figure out how we can expand those programs and also encourage the faculty that we need to be trained to be able to be as successful as faculty in delivering online instruction as they are in the classroom.
I'd add a couple of quick points. One, the expansion of technology is really important, including the expansion of online education, but not as a money-saving salvation. It really needs to be done in the light of what the needs of the educational needs and the occupational needs are in society. So we need to be thoughtful about how we do that. But in many ways, college education is still delivered the way it was 200 or 300 years ago. And so there is a real need in both the public and the private sector to expand into a more 21st century form of education or make sure we're meeting those needs. The other part about it is colleges and universities are where the new technology really starts. I mean, those are where you get the education that, and particularly in the UC and other research institutions, that's where innovation comes from. I have no doubt that a great many technological advances happened because somebody was sitting in a classroom one day and got really frustrated about something and said, I wonder if I can solve this. And the next day they're working for Google or somebody else like that. And so it really feeds on itself, and I think that's a very important kind of thing. The other piece, Senator Corbett alluded briefly, we have to have access to the tools of technology for every student. You cannot be excluded from that kind of education because your family can't afford to give you the computer or the cell phone or whatever else that you need. These things have become essentials, and we have to find ways to make sure that students are not being pushed out of a more technological education because they can't afford the tools that they need.
Thank you.
Very good.
Hi, my name is Aaron Zorman from the Civitas Academy at Rio Americano. When the master plan was put forth 50 years ago, it set up that the UCs, CSUs, and community colleges would all work on certain aspects of necessary jobs. And my question is, with UCs having to reject many students who are wanting to get like a doctorate or an advanced degree, would it be possible for CSUs or community colleges to take out private loans that would allow them to create the institutions necessary for students to go to them to get the higher education that UCs are providing?
Can I ask, are you talking about the CSUs would take out loans to offer PhD programs?
Yes.
I guess anything's possible, but let me talk a little bit about the differentiation in mission. First, if we look at the needs of California state education, that we need a certain number of PhDs in a certain number of fields, we need a certain number of MAs, MBAs, other kinds of things in certain kinds of fields. We need to think about how we need a certain number of lawyers. We've had some debate in CPEC over law schools. So there are every area of education, there will be a set of needs that should be addressed. The effort to differentiate mission was to keep the institutions from competing and chewing each other up. In this era, we need to be looking at what does each level of institution need to do. CSU has now started to do some, not PhDs, which are essentially research and scholarly degrees, but some professional doctorates. I think that the master plan, if we're going to do that, should begin to look at criteria for that kind of mission creep. But there may be some validity in it. So, and we've been doing it a little bit ad hoc. But we need to talk about the kinds of degrees that are required in our workforce to have a sense of 5, 10, 15 years from now what's going to be needed, and to work with the private sector universities, which actually currently produce about 60 to 70% of the graduate degrees in California. So the independent sector is as big as the UC in terms of student body. The real pressure on at the moment is on undergraduates. Mm-hmm. Those are the where people are being excluded. And so, but in the planning, you also have to make sure that you have adequate capacity for graduate level education that really meets the needs of the state and the economy. It's a good question.
I'd like to briefly touch on your second part of your question, which I think is a value question and a political question, which is, can UCs or CSUs take on loans? Or, in other words, how do we pay for what we know we want or what we need? And I think that's a big question that we're going to have to, as a populace in the state, as voters, we're going to have to answer. What do we really want for education? Do we want more doctors? Do we want more researchers? Do we want, those folks who identified and found all these new elements that are now on our periodic tables that came out of California, like Californium, Berkeleyum, that came out of Berkeley. elements that are nuclear, things that we would have never identified if we didn't have the research in those institutions here in our own state. So I think that's the interesting part of your question is how do we pay for things that we want? And if we want the public to pay for it because it's a public good, then that's a question we'll have to answer this fall.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Cole Daly, a freshman in the Civitas program at Rio Americano. And if we do intend to implement new technology like smartphones in class for colleges, do you believe that students will begin to get distracted by this new technology and start texting in class or such? And do you think that
start doing that?
Aren't you already
doing it now? Yes, I think that's already
openly.
happening. But
Do it
go
more
ahead.
openly, I guess. And do you think that cheating would flourish more if it was implemented?
Well, the issue of cheating is really a different issue from the technology.
Right.
And there has been, and I know that technology has somehow made it easier. That's kind of an educational model discussion and an issue of teaching students to have integrity. And it's also, I think, an issue to help measure learning on tests in a way that is really authentic and that you can't cheat your way around. You can cheat on a multiple choice test in ways that you couldn't if you had to sit down and write an essay that really showed whether you could think through an issue and solve a problem and apply learning. So, but I think those are separate things. I think there's already a lot of technology issues in classrooms right now, and they need to be an issue for policy. So if we can focus the use of technology in classrooms and get students so engaged in doing the work of the class on the technological tools, I think that may help ameliorate it. Even if we thought technology in the classroom was and smartphones and all those things, and I've got a smartphone. I mean, I couldn't do my work without it. Even if we thought those things were terrible, we're not going to. The world is moving with this direction. We couldn't stop it if we tried. So the question is how to make those things work well in an educational environment, which is really a question for all educators.
Right. Part of that question is, without technology, do you think everybody's really paying attention anyway? I don't know. I think there are other variables. So it's not like we're starting from an attentive society, and then we're moving toward more inattention, although that may be true, that this may increase that tendency. No, I think that really what you're raising is that's what was just mentioned by Karen. How do we create learning environments that maintain and motivate people to want to participate in those environments? And that's not the technology's fault. That's really the creation of those environments.
I will also say thank you. I haven't noticed anybody sitting here texting or doing anything on their cell phones while we've been talking, so thank you.
But we'll watch you.
Well, and just quickly, I wanted to add, I think Senator Lowenthal hit the nail on the head about the learning environments, and I think something that we're often remiss in doing is taking student input, the very students who are using technology and able to multitask in ways that we can't comprehend, and asking them how we can integrate it into an effective learning environment. So we're going to have to be more creative and more engaged with students on how we would use those technologies more effectively.
So while we might not have had cell phones when we were in school to play with, we might have had a novel stuck in our history book.
Might have.
Yeah. Okay. Next question.
Hi, my name is Bushra Samimi. I'm a senior from Mount Union High School. I'm addressing this question to the whole entire panel. I have a couple issues concerning the master plan. I believe it was made for accessibility, right, to all students regardless of their financial position. Well, how would you fund it for the people? Would you increase the scholarships available, like Cal Grants, Pell Grants, all the other things? Or would you give more tuition free? How would you balance that? And concerning the letting more transfers come in, how would you guys balance the amount of transfers coming into the UC system and the freshmen or the undergraduate who want to go straight from high school into the UC system? How would you balance that?
It's interesting. You have two different questions, but I think the first question, and I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but goes down to, do we either provide lower fees or make it easier to get in because the cost is low, or do we provide more scholarships? Either way you look at that equation, it relies on one single input, which is who pays for it. And if
Which is the question.
Yeah, and that question is who pays for it. And in our current system, the taxpayers pay for it. Has the amount of revenue that we've received from taxpayers been enough to meet the master plan? My answer would be no, it hasn't. And so what we've relied on is this concept of fees, which you could, in essence, qualify as a tax on students, tax on families.
Yeah.
So the answer, I would guess, would be we have to pay.
I think that the question also is, historically, when we talk about, or Eric talks about, taxpayers pay, we're talking about that there's a public good, the general fund of California helps to support that because that's where the taxpayers' monies all come into. But we've seen, not necessarily only in education, we've seen in all the other aspects of California, whether it's healthcare or whether it's transportation, that we're moving more towards, and sometimes we're moving not because we want to, but because we need the revenue, to more of a user pay system. And so that's what you're saying, and that gets to that second question. How do you balance between users paying more of the system, which is happening? Do we reach a point where that's no longer really appropriate? We've lost the concept of a public university that the general taxpayer supports. Those are the questions that will have to be decided and talked about. Right now, all we can say is we're moving more towards, or we have been moving more towards a use. But that was because we didn't have a sustainable system and we were looking around for anything that worked. Now we've got to figure out and have really intelligent discussions about those balances, because it's not only how do we balance between freshmen coming in and transfers, we're also, the other question that came up earlier, what's the balance between in-state students and out-of-state students if we're asking the university to find its own revenue to maintain its programs? All those have to be discussed.
So are you saying that the master plan is non-accommodating? Like, are you saying that it can be altered or adjusted?
The master plan, nothing, it's not like the Constitution that the conditions under which it was written 50 years ago still exist. We're an evolving state, and we use that as a guideline. And what you're saying is we really need to what we're saying is we're at a critical point now where we need to rethink some of these questions.
There's also existing policy right now in the UC and the CSU and the community colleges is that as fees go up, a certain portion of the income from the increased fees goes into increased institutional aid. Financial aid is not just Pell Grants from the federal government and Cal Grants from California. It's also scholarships. And that's how, frankly, that's how I got through USC. If I hadn't had a USC scholarship, I couldn't have afforded that either. So, the institutional aid, currently the University of California is trying to make sure that students up to $80,000 don't have to pay for that increase in fees. There's still a point that it becomes difficult and challenging, and the proposed increase in community college fees, a lot of those will be absorbed by students being able to get what are called BOG waivers, the Board of Governors waivers of fees. So every fee increase does not hit evenly across. This is where the middle class issue comes from, because the middle class people are absorbing more of those increases directly. We do need to decide what's the maximum level we should ask students as users to contribute to their education, and to what extent can we backfill that. There are, by the way, tax credits, the federal tax credits that will help families write down the cost of fee increases. But nevertheless, at some point you're going to have to step, and then you also have to pay for living costs, you have to pay for auto costs, you have to pay for textbooks, which was another issue for costliness. So the answers aren't easy, but I will tell you that right now the public systems in California are doing their best to minimize the impact of those increases on students.
It wasn't too long ago that I got out of, that I graduated from college, and the question of also student loans comes into play. What families and individuals are willing to invest in their own future? We rely on no fees or scholarships. In essence, money you never have to pay back for something that you're going to benefit in the long run. So I think we also have to have an honest discussion about taking on student loans. I mean, we'll purchase a car and we'll take out a loan for a long time for a vehicle that depreciates the day you walk out of that market. But the day you walk out of college with a degree, your value continues to grow every single day that you put a work experience connected with that degree. The question that institutions and universities and the state of California has to answer is, how can we expect parents and students to take on student loans when we can't guarantee that they can get their class and graduate at the time frame that they want to make that investment realistic?
So, in regards to funding for the public institutions, what would you do if the enrollment was dropped for public institutions and an increase for privates? Would you still provide the same amount of funding?
The proposal this year, for some time now, the university systems, all three of the segments, have been accepting more students than the current funding formula requires them, they're actually required to accept them, but they don't get paid for all of them. All of the segments are trying to expand their capacity and not cut enrollment. The general fund contribution to public higher education in California was about 17% a couple of decades ago. It's down to around 10, 11% right now. Last year, higher education did not take big cuts. This year, they're looking at a fairly sizable cut. And it's very hard. In fact, none of the segments are going in this year and saying, don't do these cuts, take it out of somebody else, because all of the other places you can take it out of are as bad or worse. The legislature is at the point of no choice is good anymore. So I understand your frustration. I think that the segments, the long-term issue is to figure out how you can meet capacity needs. The shorter-term issue is how you get through the crisis. But we're not just... The legislature makes a decision every year based on a whole bunch of factors that are not unrelated to each other. Colleges and universities do not live in a vacuum. They are affected by economic trends. They are affected by budget trends. So there isn't an easy answer to the question you've asked.
Thank you for attempting to answer my question.
One of the issues that hasn't come up here yet is that despite the rather steep increases in fees in the public universities in California the last few years, by and large, we still pay less to go to university in California than they do in most other states in the nation.
Right. In fact, California's community college fees, even with the proposed fee increase, will be the lowest in the nation. By far, right.
Hi, my name is Rianne Barney. I'm from the Rio Americano Civitas program. And my question is, what do you propose to do about the affordability issue for families sending more than one child to college at a time?
Adoption.
You know, I think that gets back to Eric's earlier response, which is really helping families understand what the availability of financial aid is, but then going beyond that and really walking families through the return on investment for an education. I think that analogy that Eric used with the car is so appropriate, and I actually use it quite often with students that I work with, because we know that with the college education, our students will earn significantly more over a lifetime. You've heard that 1 million more figure, and the more advanced your education goes, the greater that lifetime earnings will go as well. And I think that it's very difficult for families to shoulder the burden of a college education. I came from a very low-income family and actually put myself through college and ended up taking out student loans, which I am still paying off. But I was able to enter the workforce and earn a good living as a result of that degree. And so I think we really have to put that out as, you know, finances should not be a deterrent. Even if we're lending, if we have prospects of employment, it's worth it. And it certainly is difficult for families who have multiple children. I understand that. But it's a burden that's worth pursuing.
Could I ask, how many of you are seniors? How many of you are planning to go to college next year? And how many of you have filled out and submitted the FAFSA, the federal application? We're finding that not as many students, and I think I saw fewer hands go up for that. Maybe you don't. The ones who didn't raise their hands don't need financial aid, but that is the absolute critical first step in being eligible for any kind of financial aid. So, and I would encourage that not only look at the CPEC website, which has some college guides on it that you can get some information, but csac.ca.gov is the Student Aid Commission, and they have a lot of information for how you can access a variety of things. And we also need some counseling about the absorption of loans. We find many students are taking on a much bigger burden and not realizing until they're finished that maybe they could have done it with a little bit less of a burden.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily Hansen. I'm from the Rio Americano Civitas program. My question for the panel is, if funding for education would have such a positive effect on our struggling economy, why don't we invest a lot of our resources into higher education now so more students will get an advanced education and fill our country's jobs so the country's economy will improve?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we all struggle with that, and what you're saying is, how do we set priorities? We in the legislature, which provides the general fund revenues, and that's the state's portion, are tremendously constrained by how much flexibility we have, because we have to weigh money when we, in the sense that it's a zero-sum game. We cannot create money. We have to have, as Senator Corbett said earlier, a balanced budget between our revenues and our expenditures. For the last number of years, we have been spending at the end of the year more money than we take in. We can't keep going on like that. If we cut, higher education is competing with K through 12. It's competing with child care. It's competing with health and human services, senior services, keeping people in their communities, providing health care for those that cannot afford health care, making sure that kids go to school and having all the immunizations and having the resources to go to preschool programs. And it's also the corrections. That's it. It's going to come from someplace because we're not increasing taxes. Our message to you is, even if you want to maintain where we are now, we have to have that public discussion, because that will be on the ballot just to maintain. Because if we go down in June, if we have to do more cuts, that we won't be having this discussion about finding more money for high, as you point out. Everyone on this panel wants to find more money in this, wants to grow the economy, wants to see California prosper and make sure that, and we understand that California's prospering is due to, it will be tied in large part to having a higher educational system that can turn out the workers and the research and provide for the direction of a new economy as we move towards a cleaner, greener kind of change in our economy. It's all going to come from the higher education. But it's also dependent upon that we have, to make these choices, that we have the resources. And that's going to be up to you, everybody in this room, thinking about that and talking to people about that discussion. Do we want to maintain these systems the way they are now, or do we want to cut them, not raise them? That's going to be the choice before you.
I'm going to step just a little bit out of the direct response and say that if you've not taken a look at a book called California Crack Up by Mark Paul and Joe Matthews, you might want to do that. It's very accessible reading, and in the first half of it, it describes not just the last 30 years since Prop 13 and a lot of other things have happened. For instance, 50% of every new tax dollar, maybe 40% of every new tax dollar goes directly to K-12 education because of Prop 98. That's a very important statement of California's priority for K-12 education, but it also constrains all the other areas of the budget. But the book gives you an idea of how complicated California has made its governance system over the last 150 years, starting with a very long, complicated constitution. And the legislature and policymakers, policy advisors like us, have to look at the whole picture, which is not just about education alone. And each year it's gotten harder and harder to weigh those priorities. Everything left in the budget now is arguably a high priority issue. And so I think we've we've got some. I'm not sure I agree. The second half of the book is a lot of solutions. I don't know that I agree with all of them, but at least it gets people understanding the problem pretty clearly and perhaps looking at some solutions.
It's a great book.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Trevor Phillips. I'm a senior at Mount Eden High School. My question is, one of the three main ways proponents of the master plan cite to close the gap between the state's need for educational workers and the ability of Californians to achieve college degrees is to diversify student bodies at universities. But what does someone's ethnicity, nationality, or sexual orientation have to do with the state's need for educational workers or the ability to achieve a college degree?
Interesting question.
You know, it's interesting because I started my college degree before Proposition 209. And Proposition 209 required that universities not use any race, religion, gender as a factor for admission. And the demographics of the campus was much different. It was much smaller number of Latinos, much smaller of African Americans, and larger number of Caucasian white students. But my college, the College of Engineering and Computer Science, was a very diverse college. And what I could tell was that the learning experience by having a diverse body was much higher from being in a college that had a very diverse set of folks from coming from different geographic locations, family histories, students who had families who were civil engineers and contractors for many years, foreign students coming from Jordan and Egypt, Latinos who were like myself from generations of families whose parents never got past the 5th grade, and the not just the information that you learn in the textbook that you pick up something, but it's that mixture of student population in the classroom that I think created a much more rounded student in that College of Engineering that you probably saw in other sectors of our campus. I think Prop 209 may have changed some of that.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to see a study on the impact of 209 on college enrollment. And one of the things that happened was that 209 was passed because it said you can't have quotas. And most affirmative action programs were not quota programs to begin with. But it also, after the thing was passed, then lawsuits were, every time that outreach efforts were made to underrepresented populations, those got cut off as being in violation of Prop 209. So that's been a very subtle kind of undercurrent on how we address things. CPEC has been absolutely committed to open access in all the policy advice that we've ever given, and into correcting achievement gaps and into involving more and more underrepresented students in colleges and universities. And there are a number of tools to do that. The reality is that in California, we are now a majority-minority state. You know, that means that there are fewer Caucasians than there are the combination of all other groups. The growth, particularly in the Latino population, is huge. You are the workforce of the future. California's workforce is diverse, and unfortunately, some of the fastest-growing populations are the ones who've had the most struggles, who are in some of the worst schools, because if you're in a lousy high school, you're going to have a harder time getting into college at all. So there's an income as well as a diversity, an ethnic and gender issue. There are all kinds of equity issues. We tend to talk about each one separately, and the actual reality is that a lot of them go together, and if you don't understand the intersection of them and you don't pay explicit policy attention to correcting them, then they're going to be with us for a long time. I have seen in the 14 years I've been in this business, I have seen explicit efforts to promote equity, to promote access for underrepresented populations, to help students in bad schools achieve better, first get the quality education they're entitled to in the first place, and secondly, to be competitive across the board. I've seen the money and the policy support for that diminish dramatically. So educational equity and therefore workforce equity doesn't happen by accident or by osmosis. It happens because people pay attention to it. And one of the things that, and CPEC and the public universities have tried to pay attention to it. We need your support out there in the real world to say, you can't leave people behind anymore.
but can you give me concrete examples of how diversifying universities impacts education, higher education?
Diversified universities? I'm not sure I understand the question.
My question was, how does diversifying universities close the gap between states' need for educational workers and the ability of Californians to achieve college degrees?
I probably would say, actually, because more and more of California's population, young population, is going to be working age population, are students of color and students from underrepresented groups. If you don't educate them, then they're not going to be able to take their place in California's economy. So we actually have to increase the access of post-secondary education to reflect California's population, and we have to make sure that everybody who wants an opportunity at some point can get into a college or university to do that.
You know, we as a society have tended not to really deal with prevention, but to deal with patching up things after there have been problems. We can no longer afford that luxury. We're in a worldwide global economy. We have to use our resources wisely. It's inhumane to do it that way. As Karen pointed out, people get left behind. We need to ensure student success. That's it. At every level, every student needs to come out and make those choices in terms of and have those opportunities to where they want to go based upon having a skill level to function in the society, and a society that's responsive to those individuals, to those students, trying to find out with counselors and other things where they need to go. We need to do more of that because we can afford, because if we don't, we pay for it in the back end. We pay for it in terms of people not having the skills and using our emergency rooms. We pay for it in terms of having to provide resources to keep people when functioning and alive, when in fact we as a society could have prevented much of this. And that's really the question. How do we begin now to make sure that we ensure success right from the beginning, whatever that definition of success is? And I always believe that people have to participate together in defining what that success is, but that has to happen. It's intolerable, the amount of people that we allow to fall between the cracks. And it's inexcusable in terms of a society that has limited resources, and it's inhumane.
I absolutely agree with what Senator Lowenthal said. And earlier this morning, I referenced the Closing the Gap report, the projected shortage of 1 million BAs. So back to what Karen said, demographically, if we are going to be able to meet that future workforce need, we have to significantly increase the number of Latinos and African Americans successfully reaching their college goals. That's just the reality of the state. I think, just from a personal standpoint, it's so important to recognize that college experiences are supposed to be a microcosm of the world, and by having a diverse student body population, your college experience is so much more rich. But the reality is, right now, statistically, our Latino and African American populations are not succeeding in reaching their college goals at the rates by their white counterparts. So, that's significant when we talk about letting students slip through the crack, and we have to have an honest conversation about how we can successfully help students in those populations move towards their goals.
There's actually, when you're as old as I am, you can begin to see the difference. The commitment to diversity in California's higher ed systems, I can see the difference in the workplace in the last 40 years. When I got into broadcast news, there were virtually no women doing it. There were virtually no people of color doing it. By the time I left in 1979, and it's increased to some degree since, not that I'm recommending television news as an occupation, but it has changed dramatically. That's partly because our higher education institutions have tried to serve diverse needs. The other issue is capacity. If we increase populations of African American and Latinos in colleges and universities, people who are Caucasian and Asian feel pushed out. We've got to talk about the size of the pie. We should find a way that every person has access, and that they don't have disadvantageous access or disadvantageous loss of access. And that partly means really addressing the fact that we need to continue to make the pie bigger too, so that we're not pitting groups against each other, fighting over not enough pieces of pie to meet the needs. But I will tell you that we've already seen the evidence in workplaces of increased diversity in higher education, and we've got a long way to go, but we can use that evidence to begin to support moving forward. Thank you.
When we talk about diversity in higher education, the gentleman also referred to gender. One of the interesting things that we see going on now is we've got a higher percentage of young women entering college and graduating from college than males. So that's another interesting issue.
We did a whole series of reports on that, and it's a pipeline. It starts in high school, so hopefully all of you out there who are going to college are going to get your guy friends to go as well.
Hi, my name's Erin Barney. I'm from the Rio Americano Civitas program. And to get through college, many students need to take out student loans, and now as graduates, they are facing a tremendous debt. What do you propose we do to help graduates that are now swamped with debt?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, there have been programs that we've done to waive student loans, forgiveness loans. And I think we need to continue those types of programs as well, where we incentivize those with skills to go in areas of need. We know we need good teachers in some of our struggling schools. We should look at incentivizing those folks to go to those struggling schools. We know we need more doctors in rural areas and ag areas in the Central Valley. I think we need to look at how do we work with our federal partners to provide incentives such as loan waivers or reductions for those folks who decide to go and work in less lucrative areas that we have a tremendous amount of public need.
The loan forgiveness programs, I think, are really an important policy tool for being able to encourage people to go into needed occupations. We have not been able to issue as many of those loans as we'd like because they have to be paid back out of public money at some point. And as public money is diminished, that's what happens. One of the things we don't even talk about in the student loan program problem is how many people have credit card and home equity and other kinds of debt that they go into that is simply not counted up at the moment, and that's a real issue for families. The federal government at the moment is the big player in this, and they've made a major policy shift to take the private sector out of the student loan business and make direct federal loans to students, which was intended to lower the loan burden over time. There's some things about I'm not an expert in student loans, but it is a serious area of concern. It is growing. It is particularly growing in the private for-profit schools, which is another issue that needs to be looked at. So the best bet is to try to both keep the cost of college down and the access to non-loan aid as high as possible, and to help families plan through and to use tax benefits and things of that sort. But somewhere along the line, the piper has to be paid. So, and I think I've got friends with over $100,000 in loan balances. That is just scary. And that is an issue that I think, as we watch what the feds do with it, there may be some eventual things that the state can do about it. But loan forgiveness programs are at the moment the major tool we have to deal with it.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ariel Krellis, and I represent the Rio Americano Civitas program. I address the entire board. Californians have given a low approval rating for Governor Schwarzenegger and the state legislature for their handling of the higher educational system. What reforms or tough choices, as stated earlier, would Governor Jerry Brown enact to further positively increase this rating, considering the amount of money already cut to higher educational systems?
Well, I think if it's worth saying, it's worth repeating. I think Governor Brown has laid out what he has said, that there is both a short-term and immediate crisis and a period of time to do reform. Right now, the governor has said that unless we get our economic house in order, total house in order, we can't talk about higher education. We can't talk about K through 12. We can't talk about health and human services. We've got to have a sustainable budget. People have to know, the universities have to know how much they're going to get in the next year, and they have to be able to plan. We're talking about how we increase access, capacity. That takes stability. The governor said we are going to do that now. Right now, everything else is off the table until we create a sustainable system. And you, the public, are going to determine just what that means, because you're going to vote on it. So that's going to be the decision. Everything else is predicated on that, what that decision turns out. First, it's got to get to you, and then you've got to vote on it. And your parents have to vote on it, and your friends have to vote on it. At that point, if it does create some sort of sustainability, you've heard here a lot of the talk and discussions about where potential things of where we can move and how we increase capacity and how we have long-range planning. And I think that will happen. And I think that we're at a point where we're either going to move forward greatly as a state or we're going to get stuck. I vote for moving forward greatly, and that cannot happen in terms of public higher education unless we pass the maintenance of the fees and the taxes that we have now on the books and provide stability for the next 5 years. That's it.
Thank you.
We're getting close to our time limit, so we're going to see if we can get in one, maybe two more questions.
Hello, my name is Monica Pallid, and I am currently a junior at the Academy of Our Lady of Peace in San Diego. My question is for all panelists. What is the probability, or is there even a probability, that a sliding tuition scale based on familial income within the state of California could be implemented to increase the affordability of a college education?
It's a policy question that CPEC may eventually look at. I think to some degree, and if it's already in effect, because fees are either written down or provided by financial aid, particularly in community colleges with the direct BOG waivers. So California's strategy to do that is to charge a uniform tuition amount or a uniform fee amount, depending on which word you want to use, and then to backfill those costs with financial aid. There might be some purpose in looking at a strategy like that at some point in the future, but it's not going to solve the problem that we're basically underfunding our public higher education systems to begin with. So that's a little bit. It's not going to be a solution unless you can figure out where the money comes from to make up for the lower fees if you were indeed to do that. So we keep getting back to, unfortunately, that there's a reality here of there's so much money in the system and the economy generates so much and things cost so much, and we're working around the margins of all of those things. But it's not an issue that I think we're going to look at in the immediate future. I don't know where it might be as a potential strategy down the line.
Thank you.
Do we have time, sir, to try to get in one more quick question? Let's go. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Daniels from Rio Americano Civitas program, and I'm addressing all the members. My question is, do you think California will be able to compete with other states and private schools who have more funding and classes, and how will we be able to entice students to come here?
Do I think we'll be able to compete without providing the additional investment? I don't think so. I think we've kind of stretched our universities as much as we can. And to their credit, they've continued to try to achieve as much as they can with less. And every time we ask them for less, we've asked families to pay for more at the same time without even offering them less. I find it difficult to believe how we can provide the same level of education that I received if we don't invest in the research, in the facilities. I went through an engineering program, so my concern becomes those are high, expensive cost programs that turn out students that can actually generate a lot of income in the year and pay a lot of taxes back into education. If we don't invest in those programs that cost a lot of money, I don't see how we can compete in the future.
It's not just higher education where our competitiveness is sliding. It's across the board. Business and employers want a state that they can actually operate in a very positive way, and we've had such a long-term disinvestment in our public infrastructure to support a strong economy that at some point it's beginning to catch up to us right now. This is a larger issue. There are no silver bullet answers. Solving higher ed's problems are not going to solve California's problems. So if I can leave you with one message, is to try the best you can to understand the larger picture and use this next couple of months, leading up to an election in June, if we have one, to talk about California's needs for what kind of a state, what kind of a society we're going to be overall. And if we make the right decisions about what California is going to be as a state, then higher education is going to be fine.
I would just say, I think the reality is that California is dealing with a myriad of challenges. But if we're going to compete on a national and international level, we are going to have to, long-term, figure out a way to invest in our public higher education systems. The campaign put out a report called Return on Investment that shows that for every new $1 invested in public higher education, the state will get $3 return. And that's based on reduced needs for social services, reduced incarceration, and increased tax revenues. But we know that we don't have those monies right now. And so as you go back and speak with your parents about the conversation we had today and the difficult choices facing the state of California, I hope the message that you will bring to them is that if we're going to continue to maintain our funding for public higher education, this continuation of the taxes is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we are going to face ourselves in a greater crisis than we are today.
Thank you very much. As we come down to our final minute, I want to take just a quick second to thank our very distinguished and knowledgeable panel. Obviously, they understand the issues very well, and it's a very busy time of year for all of you. So thank you so much for spending time with us today. And again to you, continue thinking, continue reading, continue learning. We're at a crossroads in our great state of California, and the future of not only education, but our state is in your hands. Enjoy the rest of your day and travel safely home.
Take handouts.